DiscerningHearts.com presents Inside the Pages, insights from today's most compelling authors. I'm your host, Kris McGregor, and I'm delighted to be joined by Leila Miller, who's the author of Raising Chaste Catholic Men, Practical Advice, Mom to Mom, Primal Loss, The Now Adult Children of Divorce Speak. She blogs at Little Catholic Bubble and is a contributor to the Catholic Answers magazine online. With Leila Miller, we go inside the pages of Made This Way, How to Prepare Kids to Face Today's Tough Moral Issues, co-authored with Trent and published by Catholic Answers. Leila, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Kris, for having me.
Made This Way. How did you conceptualize this? How did this come together and your association with Trent?
Yes. So it's interesting because Trent and I go way back, believe it or not. He was one of the chaperones even on my oldest daughter's trip to World Youth Day in Sydney a long time ago. So he used to live here, and I knew him when. And then, of course, he went off and became a great Catholic apologist and moved away. And we've kept in touch. And I, as a mother of 8, had this idea. I've been teaching the faith since my reversion about 24 years ago, and raised up 8 children in that time, or I'm still raising some of them. But part of the way that I always had taught my children was through what I now know is a natural law-based, reason-based teaching of how to make the world make sense to my kids, of the moral law. Mm-hmm. And I found that worked really well, especially in these confusing times. It seems that they really understood, you have to use a thing according to its nature, including how we were made as human beings, and that applies to us as moral agents, and how does God want us to live, and this is why. And so a lot of reason and logic kind of went into the way that I taught the kids the moral law, in addition to, of course, the doctrines of the faith and just prayer and all the spiritual dimensions. And so I realized that, as we go along in this culture, more and more people were not employing natural law techniques or reason with their children. They were kind of going along with the way the culture looks at things, which is based on feelings or emotions and not grounded in much. And so a lot of confusion would reign even among Catholics and Catholic families, and the kids would tend to go off the rails at a certain point because life didn't make sense and they didn't understand why they had to act a certain way or that God made us a certain way. So anyway, I thought, well, maybe I have something to offer here, because it's really not that difficult to teach this way, or at least put this part of that kind of teaching into raising your children. And at the same time, Trent kind of had the same idea of how to really reach people in explaining things in simple ways, the moral law. And we happened to just providentially meet up at I was finishing a taping down at the diocese, and he was just about to start a taping, and we started chatting about it. And I said, we talked about what we were doing, and I said, I have this idea for a book. And he said, that's kind of what I was thinking of. So anyway, then we had breakfast, we worked it all out, and we had this great collaboration, so I think it worked out really well.
Oh, I'd say it worked out exceptionally well. And the thing is, Leila, what you bring to this, amongst many other rich fruits here, is the experience of having to raise, can we say with 8 kids, you've spanned a generation, actually, haven't you?
Yes, and that's the interesting thing as well. So my oldest is 27, and my youngest is 8. So the first few children were raised in a time where we weren't having to face things like, LGBTQI, whatever, in your face all the time, even in children's shows, even in the libraries. You weren't having to hear, transgender wasn't even a thing. Nobody had to deal with that. So when my first kids were coming up, it wasn't an issue. All of a sudden, now I'm raising the second half of my kids, and it's everywhere. You can't escape it. So it adds to the anxiety of a Catholic parent who doesn't know how to approach these issues. It's a terrifying culture. And so I think more and more parents are losing their confidence, and they don't know how to speak to their children about these things. And it's that's how the evil one designed it, to make us afraid and to back off on the truth. So hopefully this book does something to give parents back their confidence.
Hey, if we're honest about this, we don't even know how to talk to our friends or our family, our coworkers. These issues are confusing to us as well, aren't they?
Oh, goodness. Yes, yes. And that's another part of what we wanted to do, is to also educate the adults, because there's a lot of fear, not only because we're afraid to be socially shamed, because that's what's done now. If you're kind of, you're considered really mean if you don't go along with the spirit of the age and the new morality. But we don't feel like we have the words anyway. So it would be almost a trap to start talking about these things with our friends and family who have really great words of quote unquote, compassion and love, and so we feel very mean, inadequate. We feel, ashamed. And so part of the book is making sure that the adults can also clearly understand why we believe as we do in the moral law, how it all fits together, and then how to take that and explain it to the children as well.
You bring up a good point. When we're trying to talk not only to our kids, but we're trying to talk to those we encounter out in the world, it's one thing when we are not sure how to articulate it, but it's also another thing when, in articulating that, you either get, one, a fiery response back and something that comes at us with anger. And that, as adults, we can kind of raise up and I want to fight back on that. But then there's the other response where you actually, and this is where your mother's heart comes in, I think, not to say something negative about guys, but I think there's something that women, it's hard when someone comes to you in genuine tears and a lack of understanding, because this is what they've been taught, this is what they know, and they don't understand why you quote or unquote don't love them enough to see this. Have you experienced that? With
my children, it hasn't occurred to us here. We haven't had that issue. We haven't had any issues with people not understanding the way that things work. Praise God.
Right.
And that's why I think the natural law approach is so important, to start young, because once you lay those foundations young, it's easier to kind of keep them seeing things clearly. But yes, I've had kids in every type of school, from big public high schools to charter schools to small Catholic schools. We've had everything. So they have a lot of people in and out of their lives and a lot of different friends. And yes, it is very difficult, because people are hurting, people don't understand, and friends sometimes do have these issues. And so it's difficult, because we love everyone. We want everyone to know God. We want everyone to get to heaven. But there are certain ways that you can't approach people who are in pain or who don't understand. It's what I call the macro versus the micro, where you could state a truth, such as, maybe a Fulton Sheen did. He could just speak to the broader culture about these things, or some of the great teachers in our church. But then when you meet an individual, there's a different approach. You can't just say to them, well, you need to stop that immediately and get back in line, and otherwise you're going to hell. And no, that's never a good idea. And so there's a different way we approach people one-on-one than we do if we're simply talking about an idea or a truth. And that's a distinction that's actually, I think, lost today, because we can't anymore separate out the person from the idea, or the action from the person. It seems like we've blurred those lines so much that to even question an idea is seen as attacking a person, and that shouldn't be the way we relate. But that unfortunately has kind of devolved down to that. So we have to be very careful.
Yeah, I was just reading some of the responses that have come back at the Youth Synod that is, at the time that we're talking, is occurring in Rome. And some of the things that are being said by the young people there is that they have a great desire to be listened to, as opposed to lectured at. And that's part of it. When you talk about relating, that is essential, isn't it? You have to listen to where they're at, hear what they know, what they feel they understand fully, or at least from their perspective, so that you can begin to have a conversation, as opposed to a lecture. And that's important, isn't it?
Oh, yes. In fact, some of the most beautiful and wonderful friendships can come when both sides can respect each other in that dialogue. When you first begin to have what could be a contentious dialogue, but instead you're looking at the person's eyes. You're viewing their body language. You're with them, and you care about them, and they can tell. People can tell if you care about them or not. So if it's just an argument to be won, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. So when you're dealing with someone one-on-one, and especially you can see in these younger people, there's wounds. The woundedness is incredible, and the pain that they have, they're saying, our teen suicide rates are way up. Mm-hmm. There's so much more depression among teens. They're already, because, and it's precisely because all the foundational truths and the things that even, our parents, our grandparents, the culture pretty much backed up the same type of morality, even if you weren't Catholic, even if you weren't Christian. You still had the same general idea that this was noble or that was good and that was probably to be avoided. But it's all in upheaval now. Everything is up for grabs. So you have very anxious young people. They don't even know what firm foundation there is to stand on anymore, and their identities are often shattered with broken families and other. So you've got a lot of pain, and that is where the church comes in to give them hope, to give them a firm foundation to stand on and to build on, and that's actually one of the most joyful things that you can give them. And they want that. We're all made for that. We're made for truth, goodness, and beauty. So they will respond, but not if they're just being, finger in their face and lectured to. But truth is important. It just has to always be coupled with a true love for the person.
We're talking again with Leila Miller about her book, Made This Way, How to Prepare Kids to Face Today's Tough Moral Issues. That in this book, the goal is to absolutely take care of those, to be good stewards, good parents to those that God has placed in our lives and our family, and to instruct them, but also in a way instruct them so that they can communicate it to those they encounter. Even if they're homeschooled, they're going to encounter other kids their age, playing neighbors, but in particular, if they're in a public school or even a Catholic school setting, to be able to articulate in a very fundamental way. And you've done that because in the book sections, I love it, advice for little kids and advice for big kids.
Mm-hmm. And we thought that was important to make sure that there's not just one way to talk to kids. You have to break it down to the ages of innocence, which is called the latency period from about age 5 to puberty. And then there's a whole different way to talk to kids once they've hit puberty and past puberty. So age appropriate is important, but each subject, and there's all these 10 controversial subjects that we're dealing with in the culture, is broken down into those sections.
Even before you get into that 10 very, very important areas, as we have alluded to throughout the beginning of our conversation, and you've mentioned it, the natural law. You have to have a basic, fundamental foundations, the building blocks of all moral teaching. And it really is very simple. I mean, that's why it's been around for quite literally forever. Yes. Am I correct, or am I overstating that?
You are correct. It almost seems like it's a foreign concept, and yet we have to understand we're in this particular era that is very bizarre. It's almost surreal, because if we could pick ourselves out of this era and put ourselves in any other previous era, the idea that we can ascertain truth, that we can see how things ought to be with human actions and moral choices. We can ascertain that with our brains, with human reason alone, even though it's from God. And that's why St. Paul would say something like, even the pagans can know this in their hearts. Well, that's the natural law. It's that we all know, for example, that it's wrong to steal. It's wrong. It's even wrong to cut in line. Everybody knows that's an injustice. I mean, there's something that we know innately about the natural law, about the moral law, that's the synonym for that. And it's not what feels natural. It's not what happens in nature. That's a big confusion that people have. It simply means how humans ought to act on the moral sphere. And so we have that innately. We know that. It's called a conscience. We used to call that a conscience, and sometimes now we have malformed consciences, and that can throw us. But just as every society knows that it is a good thing to feed a hungry person, they would also know that it's bad to rape someone. Now, again, some people might not have that formed conscience, or they might say, yeah, I know it's wrong, but I don't care, and that's a whole other issue. But that we have this innate understanding, yes, we all used to know that. So it's not that difficult to teach it to children, because children, number one, they're not tainted yet by the culture when they're little, and number two, they trust their parents. They're innately trusting of their parents, which is how God made them. And so they are designed to respond to that truth that is taught. So if you have a good relationship with your kids, if you have a friendly, loving relationship with your kids, they're going to listen to you. Things that we used to do, we always say, one of the things we say in the book is start to read certain fables to your children. We've forgotten that. But The Emperor's New Clothes, I keep recommending that, because that is the anecdote right now or the antidote, I should say, to the transgender stuff. Here you have everyone pretending that boys can be girls. That's our culture right now. And in the story, in the fable, everyone's pretending that the king is actually wearing beautiful clothing when he's really not wearing clothing. And it finally takes that little child to say, no, he's not. He's naked, Mm-hmm. So, but kids can understand that. So I say, have the kids memorize that, read it so often that it's memorized. And then they'll understand. They have a little foundation for rational thinking as they get older, so that if someone tries to convince them that a dog is a cat or a boy is a girl, they're going to go, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. Why are we going along with that? And then they can stay grounded in the truth. But it's just little things like that, but they go a long way. It's very simple, but it's very powerful, and we've lost a lot of that.
It's sad, because even the fables that we've had, we Disney-fied them. Mm-hmm. And I remember probably one of the most tragic. As a young mom myself, was almost 30 years ago now, I remember taking them to go see The Little Mermaid. And my daughters were enamored with it. I had them watch it repeatedly once it was out on video, because it kept them happy and a happy ending and everything else. The original story is that the mermaid gives up her one gift for a love that the prince is kind of a self-absorbed idiot. Mm-hmm. She gives that up, and it's to her destruction. And she dies, her father dies. It's a sad story. And the fable is, don't give up the gift that you have for something that's not worthy. Right. But we Disney-fied it, and we made it like, if I do this, well, then he'll love me. Look what will happen. And we've done that with, countless stories, haven't we?
Well, we have. And another one that is so subtle, and people didn't get this. There was the Jungle Book remake recently, and the original Jungle Book really spoke to human nature. At the end, the boy hears the woman's voice and is drawn out from the jungle and where the animals were to more of who he is as a human man, as a man who is made for woman, and to go start a family and to go be with, the two shall become one. And well, the makers of the new Jungle Book deliberately left out the climax. The whole point was that he was to go become more human and do what humans do. And in fact, they left out the whole part about the girl. Oh, that was manipulative. Oh, we don't want that. We want him to be concerned with the environment and, animals. And it's like, subtly we lost something huge, which is marriage, this is vocation, this is destiny for humanity, is how God made us in the garden. And yet it was completely taken out on purpose, because that's not the message we want anymore. And kids don't, so they're not hearing any of this anymore. They're not hearing the elevation of marriage or the elevation of, yes, it's not good for man to be alone. Yes, it's good to be dependent on another human being, and to be human, fully human. But we don't hear that, and it's all about some other agendas now.
We'll return to Inside the Pages in just a moment. Did you know that you can obtain a free app which contains all your favorite Discerning Hearts programs? Father Timothy Gallagher, Dr. Anthony Lillis, Archbishop George Lucas, Father Mauritius Fildi, and so many more, including episodes from Inside the Pages, can be obtained on the Discerning Hearts free app. This also includes all the novenas and devotionals and prayers, including the Holy Rosary and Stations of the Cross, the Chaplet of St. Michael, and the 7 Sorrows of Our Lady, all available on the Discerning Hearts free app. Visit the iTunes and Google Play app stores to obtain your free Discerning Hearts app today. A prayer of St. Ignatius of Loyola.
Take, Lord, and receive all my liberty, my memory, my understanding, and my entire will, all that I have and call my own. You have given all to me. To you, Lord, I return it. Everything is yours. Do with it what you will. Give me only your love and your grace. That is enough for me. Amen.
Hello, my name is Deacon Omar Gutierrez, and I want to ask you to support Discerning Hearts in a special way. We, Kris McGregor, the board, and I all know that not everyone listening can help financially. We know we have listeners from all parts of the world, and we have made a commitment since the beginning to make the truths shared through Discerning Hearts totally free. So while you may not be able to contribute financially, what you can do is certainly pray, but also give us positive reviews on whatever platform you use to listen to us. If it's iTunes, Android, Stitcher, or Spotify, however it is that you get these podcasts, or if you're on YouTube and you like our videos, please give us a good rating and write a review. The more good ratings and reviews we get, the higher our profile, and the more listeners will discover us, listeners who may have the means to contribute in the future. Please consider rating us and writing a positive review today.
We now return to Inside the Pages. A lot of these issues that you deal with in the book with Trent Horn really hit all of the hottest points here in our culture today. Everything from sex outside of marriage to same-sex marriage, divorce, contraception, abortion, reproductive technologies, that's a big one, modesty, pornography. We've been speaking about the transgender identity and homosexuality. And in addressing all those different issues, in many ways, the kids that are in today's society where it becomes so confusing is because their own families have so many wounds. Yeah. It's rare that kids, not rare, don't even have the opportunity to be raised in a household with the parents that are their birth parents.
Yes.
The families are broken somehow. And I'm trying to be very reverential about this because everybody has different circumstances. It's just the nature of where we're at right now. So to say that there are absolutes, you have to go back to the very fundamental basic that even kids can grasp and build on that, don't you?
Yes, they have to have something to feel is real and is stable, because there isn't a lot of that out there. And prior to this book, I edited a book called Primal Loss, The Now Adult Children of Divorce Speak. And I, as a child of an intact family, didn't realize, I had no idea until I just randomly, just on a whim, interviewed these 70 now adult children of divorce. And they had the answers, the pain that goes on for them for decades. And they don't speak about it because, it wouldn't be polite, it wouldn't be nice, and they don't want to hurt their parents, and they love their parents. But there's so many things that we don't understand about what is going on just underneath the surface of many of these walking wounded. I call them the walking wounded. They're everywhere. And so rather than being this kind of club to beat people with, this truth of God's created order, it is actually a comfort when people find it and they don't know that it exists. And yet here's the teaching, of the church on marriage and on family and what God wanted and how through sin there's injustice. There's injustice, and it's okay to say that there's injustice, and we're not, indicting anyone because, of course, we're all sinners. We're all sinners, and we've all been guilty of hurting others or disobeying God's law, and He's there for us with His mercy. But we have to begin at least to name the fact that there is a way that God wanted us to live, that there is a truth about marriage or about human sexuality, which is huge. I mean, that's a huge part. Pretty much every subject in there is touching on human sexuality and the misuse of this great gift, and why and how then it becomes just disastrous. Because, again, natural law, when you use something according to its nature, things flourish. When you use something against its nature, you usually have catastrophe, some kind of disaster comes in its wake. And that's what we see all around us. And the kids can see, especially as they get into the teen years, there's something very wrong. They see that there's disaster. They see that there's a lot of unhappiness and instability amongst their peers and even in their own homes, depending on the situation. So it's just a matter of kind of focusing that for them and making them see, well, this is why. And all those issues are connected. All the issues in the book, you wouldn't say that, oh, I didn't know that, IVF was connected somehow to same-sex marriage or connected to modesty. You wouldn't necessarily put that together, or divorce. And then you look at it and you realize, oh, it all goes back to the garden. I mean, it all goes back to this misuse of something very precious that we just have forgotten, or we have forgotten how to teach it, or to be proud of it, or to even, be able to. We never heard of it. Again, I'm part of that generation where catechesis was very lacking for decades in the Catholic Church. So hopefully we can bring that back.
Well, it comes down, don't you think, too? It's just a very basic of all Catholic social teaching is that it's the dignity of each human person that God has created. Each one uniquely, loves them uniquely. He has that love for me, that means he has that for my neighbor, and we don't violate that neighbor, just as we would not want to be violated because of our uniqueness, that unique identity. Then you go to the family. Why is the family created? To be able to give that balance to society, to experience male, to experience female, to raise those who will be out into the culture. And the ideal is in embracing who God created you to be. And I say that because the natural law, part of how you are created, that's a reality. Your gender is a reality. And the idea that it can be what I feel it should be, that's the struggle, isn't it? And where are those feelings coming from? And we don't necessarily want to go into that area, or maybe potentially that woundedness. Right.
Yes, it's difficult. And it is when you have a culture now that really almost doesn't believe in reality, or that there is a created order that is not of our making, that we don't determine what is true ontologically. So you have every cell of a man, for example, is male, every cell. And so when you say, well, but I know that I'm in the wrong body because my mind tells me so, my brain, I just have a different brain, but in the wrong body. Well, even the cells in that man's brain are male. I mean, there's nothing there that ontologically, that truthfully, really, in reality, is not a man. And so we've disconnected ourselves from reality, and instead of wanting to conform ourselves and our wills to what is real, we think we can recreate reality in our own image and in what we feel like we want it to be. And again, that just, it doesn't work. You can't live a life that is disconnected from what is real.
The struggles that we have, I mean, there will be those who will say what you feel is what you feel, and what I feel is what I feel. And somehow, because I so sincerely believe it, that it's so. Mm-hmm. And that, again, you're going back to the feeling. We know certain things just by the very appearance. I'm standing on the ground. I know it's ground because I'm standing on it, and it's solid. Even in our own country, when you have a constitution or a declaration that says that all men are created equal, well, then when some are held in slavery, the country struggles because it says that there's something not right about that.
Yes.
We had to work that out, even when in the manner of war, that to establish that was not a truth because it went against what was natural.
Exactly.
So it does have huge ramifications, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a perfect example of the natural law contradicting what is in the actual laws of a land. Mm-hmm. So when you had slavery that was enshrined in law, well, and it contradicted the created order in the way that we know that all men are created equal, that they have equal dignity, that does lead to what we have. We had chaos, we had disaster, we had evil. Mm-hmm. And then you have even up until the time, gosh, we knew this even through the 60s, because Martin Luther King Jr., in his letter from a Birmingham jail, wrote from jail, he quoted Thomas Aquinas, he quoted St. Augustine on the natural law, and he said, the reason I can't follow these laws, these segregation laws, is because they're not in accord with God's law or the natural law. Mm-hmm. So he knew that then, and he said that's why these particular laws are illegitimate laws, because they're not in harmony with God's law. And now we can say the same thing for things like transgender laws or gay marriage laws. It may look like a civil rights issue, but it's not in accord with God's created order and his natural law, and so it can never be a legitimate thing. And we need to be aware of that that's how we always, even Nuremberg, we bring up, the Nazis. Mm-hmm. If morality is just determined by what is legal, then the Nazis were not doing anything immoral, right? They were just following the law. The law was, this was okay.
And they sincerely believed it to be true.
They sincerely believed it. So how are we to argue against that? And what's interesting is that the Nuremberg trials, which, again, we mentioned this in the book, there is no basis for those convictions of those Nazi war criminals outside of an understanding of natural law, that we know better. There's something higher than the German law, and that's what's written on our hearts as human beings. So we need the natural law because it's the only thing that isn't arbitrary. Otherwise, we're just going on whatever the society wants. And then, of course, in any society, then whoever has the biggest guns wins and gets to determine the morality. So we don't want that kind of society.
Leila, what would you say to especially someone who's young? Because chances are when someone, and I hope they do, picks up a copy of your book, Made This Way, How to Prepare Kids to Face Today's Tough Moral Issues, chances are, we hope that it will get in the hands of those young families just starting out so you can start right from the get-go. But more than likely, it will get into the hands of parents who already have teenage kids or grade school kids who they're having to come right into the middle of some of these new conversations that we're facing. Not to lecture, what's the advice on how to get started in those areas? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. If they've already really encountered some of the and integrated some of the cultural thought, it can be tricky. And one thing, though, that teens and even tweens are hearing now, a lot about social justice, a lot about equality, a lot about fairness, a lot about an oppression model, that this group oppresses that group or this. So that's where you can meet them. Because honestly, if you look at an issue like abortion, there's no greater social justice or inequality or oppression model than to kill the weakest and most voiceless and defenseless among us. So that you can come at it from a social justice point of view. Same thing with divorce. I mean, there's so much social science, secular social science, on how it puts the children of divorce, which now are, huge numbers, it puts you behind your peers in so many different ways as far as health-wise, success in academics. I mean, it doesn't give us a fair and equal playing field when we say no-fault divorce is just great for everybody. Mm-hmm. No, it's not. So we look at those things, we can say that's not really good social justice, is it? Because there isn't equality for these children, and there's not equality for the children who are being aborted. And so a lot of these issues can be looked at through fairness. Again, the same way MLK used natural law, the same way we did with the Nuremberg trials. So we can put that on the same footing as this language that's being used, and then help them actually see the truth of it, the reality of how to apply the natural law, usually taking a step back instead of just saying, well, it just doesn't feel good that two men can't marry. Well, let's back it up and let's see what is marriage and why is it important to know what marriage is, and why does that matter to children who might be affected and not be having the same benefits as someone with a mother and a father. So there are ways to talk about it with using the language of the culture.
Now, here's probably the toughest question. I don't think you nor I probably would have thought it would have been so heavy even a year ago. But the question will come, how can the church, and and I'm speaking more of the institutional church, how can the church say anything about morals when they are experiencing at this moment what seems to be a moral crisis at the highest levels?
Yes. So this is the way I always speak about it. If those members of the hierarchy or of the clergy or in the church had followed the moral law as taught by the church, none of this would have happened. Mm-hmm. That shows the goodness and truth of what the church teaches. When you deviate from it, disaster. Again, disaster. This wasn't a case where people were being super Catholic and living lives of virtue the way that the saints and the church teaches. They did the opposite. So it's almost a case study in this is how you ruin everything. This is how you destroy people. This is how you destroy souls. This is how you destroy what is good by doing the opposite of what the church teaches, what God ordained as the created order, by going against our natures. It's a painful time, but that gives it clarity. Mm-hmm. That's why it's so devastating.
I've talked to people about this as well. They've asked in conversations, and I just say, the Father has allowed this in the church, in the institution of the church, this earthquake to shake the tree. The bad fruit falls out, and so we can see it. We know. And
a lot of clarity.
A lot of clarity. And it goes back to what you said. What are we lacking? What was missing? And it's the basic fundamentals. And if it's up to parents, it's up to grandparents, it's up to catechists to have an understanding and to teach the children. Because I know this seems like a long period of time in the life of the church, especially since the 60s. But actually, in a 2,000-year history, it's a smaller slice. And it can be, there is a remedy, isn't there?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as just a bit of advice, I always tell people, the bishops, the hierarchy, the clergy are there to kind of be landmarks for us to where we can access the sacraments. I mean, that's where we go to get our channels of grace. That's how Christ structured his church, to say this is the church. This is where you go for holiness through the sacraments. You can access grace through the sacraments of the church. The saints, on the other hand, are who you look to when you want to see how Christian life is lived out beautifully and fully. So if we can keep that distinction and say, okay, I know that I'm here. I've got this priest. I don't know if he's a good priest or a bad priest. I don't know if he's faithful or not, but I do know that I can get my grace. I can get the Eucharist here. I can get confession here. I can get my child baptized here. But then you look to the holiness of the saints and you say, this is how it looks lived out. So we're covered. Christ has gotten us. We're covered in every direction. We just have to be discerning. Again, discernment is a huge thing that we can't do anymore, it seems like. But yes, so Christ knows what he's doing. We're in a purification time for sure, and it's absolutely imperative. Well, it was necessary that this happen. We have to cleanse the wounds. But in the meantime, it's up to us to teach our children well, and then be part of that renewal that comes, in the aftermath of his cleansing.
Yeah, it's back to basics. I mean, it is back to basics, and I think that's what it made this way, how to prepare kids to face today's tough moral issues. I think you and Trent Horn have done a remarkable job in helping to help lead us back to that light, because I believe it was Flannery O'Connor that said that we don't make the church holy. It's Christ in the center that makes it holy. And that's where we find those foundational truths. And the natural law it all begins there, doesn't it?
It does, because it was Christ, it was God himself who gave us the natural law. And if we understand that he's the source of what we're learning here, what we're teaching here, then we are so grateful. We love what he has given us, and we want to live this way. And that's where we will find all his choicest blessings, all the joy, and all the peace. And that's something people are looking for in this culture. They're looking for some semblance of peace in just chaos. And we've got to get back to the basics. Absolutely.
I mean, you know this as a mom. It's not about laying down rules just to make your life miserable or cause you pain. They're gifts of love. That's what grace is. Grace is actually an exchange of love.
Yes, and what again the evil one tries to do is to say that, oh no, you know, this is hard, this is harsh, this is mean, and what will really bring you joy is if you go over here and deviate from that and do whatever you want, then you'll find your joy and your peace and your happiness. And it's a trap. It's a snare, and people don't see it until it's too late. And so what we're offering our children is refuge from this storm that is just swirling around us. And they will find peace. It's okay. They will see it makes sense, and they see the pitfalls that are happening all around them with their friends, and they'll be able to identify it and say, oh, there's a reason that Christ wanted us to be people of heroic virtue, because it's for us. It's for love. It's to be united with Him. So, we can't be afraid of it. It's not a mean thing, but teaching the truth in love and teaching the natural law truths is very loving. It's very, you're giving them such a gift. And that's what that's our job. That's our job. It's our vocation as parents.
You've made it easy. I know it seems complicated, but if you have basic foundational things, it actually is a very simple message.
Yes.
I think you're to highly be commended for this work. And Leila, I mean, I wish we had more time. Any final thoughts?
Oh, goodness. The final thoughts are just parents, keep your confidence. Like, that's the one thing I always tell parents, just be confident. God chose you as the parents of your children, and He is going to equip you with what you need. And take a deep breath, relax. You're going to do fine. Just keep that courage and that confidence. And it's the one thing I just want to look everyone in the eye and tell them, don't be afraid.
And get a copy of Made This Way. There you go. How about
that too.
Okay. Leila, thank you so very much.
Thank you, Kris, very much.
Well, Leila Miller, we've gone inside the pages of Made This Way, How to Prepare Kids to Face Today's Tough Moral Issues, co-authored with Trent Horn. To learn more about this book or to obtain a copy, go to CatholicAnswers.com, the website for its publisher, Catholic Answers Press, or you can find it at any fine Catholic bookstore. To hear and or to download this episode, along with hundreds of other spiritual formation programs, visit DiscerningHearts.com or download the free Discerning Hearts app available at the Apple app and at the Google Play app stores. This has been a production of Discerning Hearts. I'm your host, Kris McGregor. We hope that if this has been helpful for you, that you will first pray for our mission, and if you feel us worthy, consider a charitable donation, which is fully tax-deductible, to help support our efforts. But most of all, we hope that you will tell a friend about DiscerningHearts.com and join us next time for Inside the Pages, insights from today's most compelling authors.